So this is the second part of your notes that go along with chapter 1's lesson 2, how does a historian work? So historians, they are very academic and things like that. And we always go to historians to kind of find out more about things. But usually a historian wears more than one hat. Usually they do a bunch of different things. So they're not just a historian. So the first blank that you need to fill out is historians. Okay, so that's right there. Feel free to pause this if you need to write that. So historians are researchers that look for evidence in things that happened in the past, and they use a bunch of different tools. So historians can sometimes be professors, sometimes they can be novelists. They use history and they make a story, like a fictional story after it. Or historians are used in a bunch of different things. So we need history to kind of inform us to make sure we make good decisions. So one of the first things that historians use is they use something called a primary source. So that's the second blank that you need to fill in. Primary sources are like diaries, journals, photographs, things that were right from that historical event. Artifacts, that's a primary source. So something like a diary where someone is actually writing down their experience while it is happening is considered a primary source, right from the historical event. It could be something like our hieroglyphics from in Egypt that are written on the actual tomb of a pharaoh. That is considered a primary source. It's from the era. Okay, or a photograph depicting, Vietnam or the Civil War. Those are primary sources. That's evidence directly from the historical event. And that's what historians look to. Now, there's secondary sources, and those are created after the event. They would use research, using primary sources, newspaper articles, and things like that. They would use those and to create, so secondary are after the fact. Okay, they are created years or days or weeks after the event took place. So they were not part, or they weren't created by the people of the historical event. So for example, for the American Revolution, we have diary of George Washington. So that would be an example of a primary source. A secondary source might be someone writing a biography using the diary and using other people's historical accounts and creating a book all about George Washington. So primary source would be George Washington's diary. The secondary source would be probably someone that 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years or later wrote down all of the stories of George Washington into a biography or a book. So then the next thing, this was not highlighted right here, the next fill in the blank here. Oops, let me go back here, exit. All right, so the next thing we need to do, let's highlight this right here. So the one thing we need to make sure we're very careful about when we're reading things is to look for a bias. And that's something that we see every single day. Like if we're, what people, so a bias is someone that's using their emotions or something that using their emotions to make a statement or judge events. Okay, so some historical things are written from a certain point of view that are not necessarily biased, looking at all viewpoints. And we have that today. We definitely have that today, where people use just one viewpoint, or unfortunately become emotional about things and don't necessarily use facts. So it's very important to make sure you're reading something, to make sure it's something that's not biased. And we'll go through that some more. So, and then historians use primary and secondary sources to draw events from the past, and they make conclusions to inform the rest of the population. Historians, next up, become experts in their field, okay, and they might specialize in certain things. So they might just specialize in ancient Egypt, or they might specialize in ancient Greek, or they might specialize in World War II. So they become really specialized and narrow in what they're experts in. And a lot of times you'll see historians being interviewed for documentaries and things like that, because they usually really hone in on one thing that they're super interested in. And then historians don't always agree on things. Usually you need to talk to a few of them to really get a real picture. So history is very much a lot of detective work. It's a lot of diving deep and looking into things and looking at different things, looking at different sources and kind of coming up with your own conclusion. It's not easy. It's really, really hard. And that's why I feel like our society has become kind of lazy and not really doing their work and looking into the past and diving into things. So you always need to look in not just one place. In history, you need to make sure you look at your primary sources, your secondary sources, and really be clear and careful that you're not reading information that's biased or skewed in one way. You need to look at information that comes from everybody's viewpoint and then draw your own conclusion. That's what's very important about school, is you need to figure out, what do you believe? What do you think? And what facts back you up? So we're going to end with there. And make sure this is filled out in your notebook. Again, Mad Notes, and make sure you might want to go back and reread lesson 2 if any of this is confusing for you.